Most of us know her as the bookish, kind-hearted woman who tames the savage beast in Disney's classic animated film. Or as Emma Watson and her questionable singing. But what if I told you that Belle's story actually goes back centuries? That her tale is rooted in folklore, inspired by real people and of cultural anxieties of times gone by. And, most intriguingly, that her story has evolved in some surprising ways across history. From little town to lady of law, let's talk about Belle. Hello and welcome back to Ladies of Lore, the podcast where we take all of the most amazing women from mythology and folklore and we go on some deep dives into their origins, their stories, and how they have changed over time to reach the modern world. If you're new, a big, warm, extra welcome to you. I hope you enjoy. And if you do, please consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really enjoy listening, please feel free to leave me a comment or follow me over on Blue Sky. I love chatting with you guys. And I do share quite a bit over there. Mythology stuff, folklore stuff, history stuff, and a little bit of my day-to-day life. So you can follow me using the link in the show notes. And I'd love to see you there. Speaking of lots of stuff, I have some super cool things coming up. My little brain has been working overtime to cook up some new things for you all, including some things that you've been asking for. You know, maybe things like a book club or a Discord server or maybe even a brand new series. It's all coming, guys, and I'm so excited for everything that I have in store for you. Just bear with me. I'm working on it. I want everything to be perfect before I share all of the details with you. But today is not that day, because today is the day that we are talking about one of the most iconic heroines in storytelling and in Disney history. It's Belle, the beloved beauty from Beauty and the Beast. I am so excited to explore another Disney legend, so thank you to Jade for this recommendation. Grab a little tea, settle in, and let's explore the origins, the evolution, and the enduring legacy of Belle. Belle's story begins not with Disney, and not even really with the romanticised French fairy tale that many of us grew up hearing. It actually starts in the murky depths of folklore. The earliest known telling of anything Beauty and the Beast-like comes from ancient storytelling traditions that spanned Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. And one of the oldest precursors to the tale that we know now actually comes from the Roman myth of Cupid and Psyche. And this story comes from the ancient Roman novel Metamorphoses, written by Apuleius in the late 2nd century CE. Now, just a disclaimer before I go into a little bit more detail about that, the character names that I'm using are the Roman versions. You remember when we talked about Medusa? A lot of the myths that were ancient Greek and Roman sort of have some crossover. So what I'm telling you is using Roman names, but when you look online, you might very well find that some of the names are Greek. So this tale focuses on Psyche, a beautiful mortal woman who was pretty much worshipped for how gorgeous she was. And this caught the attention of the goddess Venus, not Aphrodite, if you're an ancient Greek. And Venus was extremely jealous that a mortal could be receiving all of the love and adoration that should really be directed at her. And it feels a bit like a repeat of Medusa and Athena, doesn't it? Although there were no snakes here, and Venus's punishment of choice was a little bit different. For Venus had a son, Cupid, and she commanded him to make Psyche fall in love with the most hideous creature imaginable. So Cupid, armed with his magical bows and arrows, descended down to carry out his mother's bidding. But as he crept into Psyche's chamber and gazed upon her, he was struck by her unparalleled beauty. His hand faltered, and instead of piercing her heart with an arrow, he accidentally scratched himself. And at that moment, Cupid fell deeply in love with her. Meanwhile, Psyche's beauty became a bit of a curse. Though she was admired from afar, no mortal dared to court her. And her parents were desperate for answers what was going on, so they consulted the oracle of Apollo. And to their horror, the oracle decreed that Psyche was destined to marry a monstrous creature. She was to be left on a rocky cliff, dressed as a bride, and abandoned to her fate. And her parents said, "Okay." And heartbroken, but obedient, Psyche went to the cliff, bracing herself for whatever horrors awaited. To her astonishment, a gentle breeze lifted her into the air. It was Zephyr, the west wind, who carried her to a lush, enchanted palace. There, an unseen voice welcomed her, and she was served a feast by invisible hands. Think, be our guest here. Each night, her mysterious husband came to her, but he forbade her from seeing his face. Despite this, Psyche found herself falling in love with the tender and gentle stranger. But her happiness was fragile. Psyche's very jealous sisters visited her and filled her mind with doubt. They convinced her that her husband was a monster who would surely devour her. Consumed by curiosity and fear, Psyche resolved to uncover the truth. One night, as her husband lay sleeping, she lit a lamp and gazed upon his face. Instead of a monster, she saw Cupid, the god of love, his beauty radiant and divine. In her shock, a drop of hot oil from the lamp fell on his shoulder and woke him up. Cupid, betrayed and heartbroken, fled. "Love cannot live where there is no trust," he told her as he disappeared. Devastated, Psyche wandered the earth searching for her lost love. She eventually came to the temple of Venus, hoping to appease the goddess and win Cupid back. But Venus, still vengeful, subjected Psyche to a series of impossible tasks. Psyche was tasked, firstly, with sorting a vast heap of grains before nightfall, then with retrieving a golden wool from a dangerous sheep, and filling a flask with water from a treacherous mountain stream. Each time, divine helpers came to her aid: ants, a river god, and an eagle. For her final task, Venus commanded Psyche to descend into the underworld and retrieve a box of beauty from Persephone, the queen of the dead. And Psyche succeeded with this too, but she was overcome by curiosity yet again, and she opened the box, hoping to enhance her own beauty. But instead, she fell into a death-like sleep. Cupid, healed from his wound and longing for Psyche, found her lifeless body and revived her with a kiss. Moved by their love, he carried her to Olympus, and he pleaded with Jupiter, the king of the gods, to grant Psyche immortality. Jupiter agreed, and Psyche was given ambrosia, the food of the gods. She and Cupid were united in marriage, and even Venus relented, allowing the couple to live happily ever after. That's not something you hear often in mythology, a happily ever after tale. God, I'm treating you guys today. And we can definitely see how this ancient story has some parallels with the Beauty and the Beast that we know now. Because you've got this beautiful girl swept away to a kind of dodgy but very beautiful mansion where she gets a gourmet meal and falls in love with an elusive, mysterious man. But when did we get from that to something that resembles what we know now? Well, if we fast forward a little bit to the 18th century, we arrive at what's considered the first formal version of the story. In 1740, French novelist, and I'm going to apologise in advance for the pronunciation of this, I am trying, French novelist Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve published a lengthy tale, La Belle et la Bête, And this version was far more complex than the simplified retellings that followed, including our Disney version. In this version, Belle wasn't just a peasant girl. She was daughter of a king and a fairy, forced to live with the beast due to a magical curse tied to her family's fate. And interestingly, this tale potentially has some real-life inspiration in the story of Catherine and her husband, Petrus Gonsalvus. And I will say that while this is one of history's most fascinating and romantic tales, it's not definitively inspiration for Beauty and the Beast, but there's definitely some similarities. Petrus Gonsalvus was born in 1537 in Tenerife, one of the Canary Islands. He had a very rare genetic condition called hypertrichosis, which is sometimes referred to as werewolf syndrome. And this caused excessive hair growth all over his body, including his face. And this condition made him a curiosity in European courts. But Petrus was not treated as a mere oddity. His intelligence and demeanour earned him a place in the court of King Henry II of France. And despite the prejudices of the time, Petrus was educated, and he became fluent in several languages. His manners and his intellect fascinated the nobility, and he became a highly regarded figure. At some point in the time in the French court, it was decided that he should probably get married, and Catherine, who was a beautiful young woman from a noble family, was chosen to be his bride. Historical records suggest that she might not actually have known about his appearance until their wedding day, which makes the circumstances of their union even more unusual. However, this is an arranged marriage with a happy ending because despite the nature of their marriage, Petrus and Catherine developed a deep bond, and they even had 7 children, 4 of whom inherited their father's condition. And the family became a subject of great interest across Europe and was often depicted in paintings, and I will put a link in the show notes with some information about the family, including some paintings of them, because it is fascinating to see. And some of the children were even given as gifts to other courts, which I don't really agree with that. It's a very romantic story, but maybe we shouldn't be selling our children as curiosities, but hey-ho. And the story of Petrus and Catherine transcends the unusual appearances, and Petrus's life challenged the societal perceptions of humanity, showing that a person could be more than their physical traits. And this relationship highlighted the complexities of arranged marriages and human connection in a world fascinated by differences. So today, Petrus Gonsalvus is sometimes regarded as an inspiration for Beauty and the Beast, though, as I said, this connection is purely speculative. But even still, their story is pretty cute and remains a poignant reminder of love, resilience, and the challenges of living in a world that often defines people by their appearances. And then, in 1756, Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont simplified Villeneuve's tale into the version that most of us recognise today. Beaumont was a French writer and educator who spent much of her life in England, where she worked as a governess, and she was deeply committed to the moral and intellectual development of children, and her writings reflect her educational philosophy. Beaumont published numerous stories, essays, and conduct books aimed to teach young readers virtuous behaviour and critical thinking, and Beauty and the Beast did exactly this. Beaumont's version removed a lot of the backstory and made it more accessible, and it also focused more on the moral lessons. Love goes deeper than appearances, and kindness can transform even the most monstrous of hearts. Her story was aimed at educating young women, teaching them to value virtue, resilience, and the importance of judging character over looks. And this whole story is available to read online. I'll include a link to it in the show notes so you can read that for yourselves. And this version quickly became the definitive telling of the story, and it's the one that's most often adapted in literature, film, and theatre, and of course, by Disney. And as the centuries rolled on, the story of Beauty and the Beast began to take on new meanings, reflecting the values and anxieties of the cultures retelling it. And this is something that we see pretty much every week on Ladies of Lore. In 19th century Europe, the tale underwent a significant transformation as it became increasingly integrated into the canon of fairy tales for children. And this period was marked by a growing interest in folk traditions and in the moral instructions of young readers, shaping how the tale was retold, illustrated, and disseminated. The Victorian era in particular played a central role in redefining the tone, the themes, and the audience of Beauty and the Beast. For instance, the tale resonated with themes of arranged marriage, because women, they often had very little say in who they married at this time. And the idea of a young bride taming her wild husband, who might seem beastly at first, was a bit of a comforting fantasy and also a grim reality. Illustrations were also a crucial part of getting Beauty and the Beast out there to audiences in the Victorian times. Artists such as Walter Crane and Edward Burne-Jones created these visually rich depictions of the story that reflected the aesthetics of pre-Raphaelite arts and crafts movements. And Walter Crane's illustrations, for instance, emphasised the story's more romantic and magical elements and featured lush, intricate settings and idealised representations of beauty. And his works often showcased a balance between realism and fantasy, capturing this Victorian fascination with the sublime and the domestic. Edward Burne-Jones, although more focused on allegorical interpretations, brought more of a ethereal quality to the Beast's enchanted palace, and that very much aligned with the Gothic revival fascination of this mystery and otherworldliness that was also on the rise in the Victorian era. And you already know what I'm going to say. There are links to some of these pieces of art in the show notes. As per usual, take a look at them because there is a really beautiful tile panel that I'll link for you to have a look at by Edward Burne-Jones. And not only this, the story's themes were also adapted to align with Victorian ideals of femininity and morality. Beauty was increasingly portrayed as the epitome of domestic virtue. Kind, obedient, and nurturing, her willingness to sacrifice her own desires for the sake of her family, and her eventual love for the Beast were interpreted as symbols of moral purity and selflessness, which were traits that were highly valued in Victorian women. And we've seen this so many times before in the podcast, the idea of this very demure, very cutesy, very feminine woman who will give it all up for her man. And at the same time, the Beast was depicted as a noble yet tragic figure, often representing this misunderstood masculinity that could be redeemed through love and compassion. And there are some specific examples of the tale's adaptation to Victorian sensibilities, one of which can be found in the serialised publication of fairy tales in magazines and newspapers. Periodicals, which were essentially Victorian magazines, newspapers, and journals, often used Beauty and the Beast as a moral story, with explicit commentary on the importance of virtue, patience, and kindness. And these retellings frequently omitted or downplayed the more fantastical elements of the story and focused instead on the moral journey of the characters. The story's magical transformations were framed as metaphors for personal growth and moral enlightenment, aligning with that good old Christian theme of redemption. And what's really interesting is that in theatre and pantomime adaptations of Beauty and the Beast, the performances did the opposite and actually exaggerated the magical elements of the story and turned it into more of a spectacle that appealed to family audiences. And while the moral lessons were still there, the theatrical versions emphasised humour, romance, and elaborate set designs. For instance, British pantomimes frequently presented the Beast as more of a comical yet endearing figure that added a layer of accessibility and entertainment for younger viewers. By the end of the 19th century, the story also intersected with broader literary trends of romanticism and Gothic fiction. The Beast's curse and his isolated palace were reimagined in some retellings as a symbol of alienation and the sublime, reflecting the romantic fascination with nature, emotion, and the supernatural. The story's depiction of beauty's bravery and compassion resonated with the romantic ideals of heroism and the redemptive power of love. And then we have the 20th century, during which the tale of Beauty and the Beast was adapted into several films, before Disney's 1991 version, with many offering rich insights into Beauty's role and the story's broader implications, including its relationship to feminist readings. And one of the most celebrated adaptations is Jean Cocteau's 1946 film La Belle et la Bête. In this story, Beauty is portrayed as a compassionate and self-sacrificing figure, deeply rooted in traditional ideals of femininity. While her kindness and gentleness are emphasised, the film also subtly critiques societal constraints placed on women, especially through Beauty's relationships with her family and the Beast. Cocteau's interpretation adds some more layers to her character, portraying her as a bit of an agent of change who transforms the Beast not merely through love, but also through her ability to see beyond appearances and to challenge surface judgments. And this is a bit more of a nuanced portrayal than what we'd seen before, and it allows Beauty to hold a quiet but powerful authority within the narrative. So some interesting layers going on there. Another notable adaptation is Gerard Hertz's 1978 Czech film Panna a Nevtor, which translates to The Virgin and the Monster. And this one offers a lot more dark and gothic interpretation of the tale. In this version, Beauty is framed as a figure caught between fear and curiosity, navigating a complex dynamic with a more overtly menacing Beast. Hertz's film, while maintaining the central romance, highlights Beauty's inner strength and resilience, challenging the notion of her as a passive participant in the Beast's redemption. And this depiction aligns with the tale's deeper feminist potential, showing that Beauty has a capacity to overcome fear and to assert her will, even with a threatening patriarchal framework. And then we come to the 1990s, and the version that we all know best. Let's have a closer look at the Disneyfication of Beauty and her transformation into Belle. But before we do, I have a little clip to play from another podcast called RPG Major. If you're into your tabletop gaming podcasts like D20 or Worlds Beyond Numbers, and if you like musicals and improv, then this is the ultimate crossover event for you. The guys over at RPG Major recorded a little something for today's episode, and we are currently actually hoping to work on a joint episode. So watch this space, as there may very well soon be a semi-musical episode of Ladies of Lore, and I will leave the link to their show in the show notes. Do go check them out if you're into that kind of podcast, because honestly, these guys are super talented and I have loved listening to this podcast.
We have two partner songs. One is for a show called Ladies of Lore. Let's teach you about lore. I've done a bunch of research and I'm going to tell you about female characters from lore.
Oh, cool.
It's really cool. It's really well done.
Yeah.
And the gal, India, who makes it, she and I have been talking for a bit back and forth. We may in the future try and do a collab episode with her.
Oh, cool.
Where she researches the siren and then throws songs at us.
Oh, wow.
Cool. Yes, cool.
Whoa.
India, if you're listening, that sounds fantastic, and I'm looking up your podcast right now. We all have lots of ladies in our lives, but we may not know the secrets that they hide. Oh, mother dear, you're just like me, ladies of lore. And
if you want to know more, sit around the campfire with the ladies of lore. If you want to know more, sit around the campfire with the ladies of lore.
I'm following it.
Thank you so much, RPG Major, for that. Please do go check them out. Let's get on with the show, shall we? So it's clear to see from the film adaptations that I just mentioned that by the time Disney adapted the story in 1991, the character of Beauty had already changed somewhat, transforming from just passively accepting her fate to raising questions about the societal treatment of women. And Disney went some way in helping to move even further away from the notion of passive heroine. In fact, Beauty and the Beast is a landmark film in the studio's history, and it's often credited with revitalising Disney's animated legacy. Because believe it or not, Disney's animation studio was in a bit of a slump before films like Beauty and the Beast came along. And it was directed by Gary Truesdale and Kirk Wise, and it became the very first animated film to receive a Best Picture nomination at the Academy Awards, which is a massive achievement. And we all know the story, so Beauty becomes Belle, a young woman who trades her freedom for her father's and becomes a prisoner in the Beast's enchanted castle. Over time, she forms a relationship with the Beast, whose kindness and humanity emerge as the curse keeping him in his monstrous form begins to break. And there's also an unfairly cute teacup and singing candlesticks. Disney's characterization of Belle reflects the attempt to move away from the more passive heroines of its earlier films, like Snow White and Aurora, who we've covered on a previous episode, and a move towards more modern, independent female protagonists. And that's something I think we've come to be really used to as a modern Disney audience, with films like Moana providing us with strong female leads who don't need no man. But Belle is intelligent, she's well read, she's ambitious, and she dreams of a life beyond her poor provincial town. And this portrayal resonated with contemporary audiences as a feminist reimagining of the traditional fairy tale heroine. Belle rejects the advances of Gaston, this hyper-masculine and narcissistic suitor who eats far too many eggs, and not only because of his arrogance, but because his values are diametrically opposed to hers. Gaston's treatment of Belle, he objectifies her and dismisses her intellect, serves as a critique of traditional gender roles and of toxic masculinity. And when you think about it and watch it back, which I have, Gaston, he's not very nice, he's horrible, he's a pig of a man. However, I will say, and it is important to say this, that the film's feminist credentials have been debated. While Belle is intelligent and strong-willed, some critics argue that her arc is constrained by the romantic structure of the story. The central relationship between Belle and the Beast has drawn a bit of scrutiny for its parallels to abusive dynamics, and some see it as an example of Stockholm Syndrome. And I mean, can you really deny that? Belle's efforts to save, quote-unquote, the Beast by seeing the good in him and enduring his hostility can be interpreted as reinforcing this notion that it's a woman's role to redeem a flawed or cruel man through patience and love. Others counter that the Beast undergoes genuine growth, taking responsibility for his actions and changing, not because of Belle's submission, but because of her integrity and insistence on mutual respect. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. How feminist is Disney's Beauty and the Beast to you? The Enchanted Castle and its inhabitants even further underscore these themes of transformation and redemption, which can also be viewed through a feminist lens. The curse on the Beast and his servants reflect a need for accountability and self-improvement, suggesting that love and humanity are earned through introspection and change, and it's not just something that you're entitled to. Belle's intellectual pursuits and her moral courage are central to breaking this curse, emphasising her active role in the story's resolution rather than her just being a passive participant. And the film's broader themes of inner beauty and valuing people for their character rather than their appearances align with feminist ideas of challenging society's expectations. Belle's refusal to conform to her town's expectations of a proper woman, epitomised by Gaston's desire for a submissive wife, further cement her as a progressive figure within the Disney canon. The narrative celebrates her autonomy and her intellect, presenting her as a role model who challenges patriarchal norms while remaining kind, empathetic, and true to herself. No longer was Belle a passive figure, simply accepting her fate. And note as well, she's given a name in this movie, whereas previously she was just described as Beauty, which is just about her looks. And isn't that pretty much the message of this whole story? So she's given a name, and she's defined by her strength, her independence, her love of books, and her desire for adventure. And the Disney version definitely gave Belle agency and modernised her character, making her a potential feminist icon for a new generation. Ultimately, Disney's Beauty and the Beast occupies a complex space within feminist discourse. It seeks to empower its heroine and challenge traditional gender dynamics, yet it does remain tied to a romantic structure, and that can perpetuate problematic ideals about relationships and female roles within them. The film's enduring popularity and influence reflect its ability to engage with feminist themes while also leaving room for critique and reinterpretation. And those reinterpretations keep on coming, even into the modern day. So let's take a look. So where do we find Belle today? In many ways, she's everywhere. The Disney version, of course, remains a cornerstone of her legacy, with adaptations like the 2017 live-action remake introducing her to a brand new generation. And listen, I'm glad it did, but also did we need this remake? Having said that, I do kind of like the Josh Groban song, so I guess it swings and roundabouts. But I digress every time we do a Disney episode. I know I go off about this, and you guys don't care. So beyond Disney, Belle's story continues to inspire authors, filmmakers, and even academics. The character of Belle in Beauty and the Beast has evolved into a complex symbol of empathy, intellect, and defiance of societal norms in modern retellings. These interpretations often highlight her role as a heroine who challenges conventional gender roles and explores human-monster relationships in diverse ways. One of the most well-known modern takes is in Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber. In Carter's The Courtship of Mr. Lion and The Tiger's Bride, which are both part of the Bloody Chamber collection, the classic Beauty and the Beast narrative is reimagined through a feminist and a gothic lens. Carter challenges traditional notions of love, agency, and transformation. In The Courtship of Mr. Lion, Belle retains her original virtues of compassion and kindness, but Carter emphasises her growing awareness of her own agency. This version of the story is more about mutual transformation than just a one-sided redemption. Mr. Lion, the Beast, changes physically, while Beauty undergoes a moral and emotional awakening, recognising her own power in the relationship. In The Tiger's Bride, the tale radically departs from traditional depictions of Belle. The protagonist, rather than taming the beast, embraces her own animalistic nature. The beast does not become human. Instead, Beauty sheds her skin to become a tiger. And this interpretation critiques societal expectations of femininity and argues for the liberation of primal instincts and true identity. And while I was reading that, I just thought about Shrek. I thought about Shrek and Fiona, because you're all expecting at the end of Shrek for them to kiss and Shrek to become handsome Shrek. But actually, Fiona stays as an ogre. Same thing, right? It's the same thing. Sorry, I digress again. I'm going off on tangents left, right and centre today. I'm on one. I'm very sorry. Another for the book talk girlies out there is the super popular A Court of Thorns and Roses series, also known as ACOTAR, by Sarah J. Maas. And this is more of a YA fantasy series, and it reimagines Beauty and the Beast in a more high-stakes, magical world. Feyre, the protagonist, echoes Belle's journey of love and growth, but also emphasises her survival instincts and her warrior-like qualities, reflecting modern ideals of strong, multifaceted heroines. And I've read the series, and look, I'm not going to lie to you, it's not my usual cup of tea. I didn't mind it. I liked the second book better. And I think throughout the whole first book, I was just constantly aware that all of these fairy people had masquerade masks on. So my brain just wouldn't let that go. And they're having very serious conversations. And all I'm thinking about is their pretty little masks. But again, digressing. Even though this might not be my cup of tea, it may very well be yours. So add it to your TBR if you've not read it already. And then on the big screen, we have Benicio del Toro's 2017 film, The Shape of Water. Here, the Beauty and the Beast archetype is modernised in a Cold War era-esque fantasy. The protagonist is called Eliza, and she's a mute woman who forms a romantic connection with a humanoid aquatic creature. Yes, you heard me right. He's got webbed hands and webbed feet, and I have seen this movie, and you know what? I kind of liked it. Eliza parallels Belle's empathy and courage, but she's far more isolated, and this reflects more modern anxieties about marginalisation and the other. Her inability to speak underscores her alignment with the creature, because both of them are existing on the fringes of society. They're both strange, they're both outcasts. And the relationship flips the power dynamics of the traditional Beauty and the Beast stories. Eliza doesn't aim to civilise or change the creature. Instead, she embraces it and its otherness, and their love thrives on mutual respect and understanding. And the film emphasises themes of inclusion, challenging the binary between human and non-human. And this echoes Beauty and the Beast's original moral, but amplifies it for a contemporary audience that increasingly values diversity and breaking down societal norms. So, as we can see, Carter's works in The Bloody Chamber and Del Toro's film redefine the human monster experience in ways that question societal taboos. They explore the monstrous as a metaphor for marginalised identities and frame love as a force that transcends superficial boundaries. In The Bloody Chamber, Carter flips the moral of transformation, and it's beauty who often changes. In The Shape of Water, the creature's humanity is never questioned, only the human's inhumane treatment of it. Both reinterpretations highlight empathy, sensuality, and power as a central thing to the dynamic between Beauty and the Beast, aligning with modern values of inclusivity and identity. By reimagining Belle's character, these stories not only refresh the classic tale, but also make it a lens to examine contemporary issues like gender equality, the nature of love, and the boundaries of humanity. So it's evident that Belle continues to thrive in pop culture, where her tale is told and retold and reimagined in so many creative ways, from Once Upon a Time, the TV show that I still haven't seen, but I am told gives Belle a feisty, adventurous personality, to the countless other novels that I don't have time to mention here today, but explore her story in sci-fi and fantasy or historical settings. Her character truly remains endlessly adaptable. Why does Belle's story continue to capture our hearts? Part of it is her relatability. She's a dreamer, she's a thinker, and she's a compassionate soul, qualities that we all aspire to. But her story is also timeless because it speaks to universal truths, that love requires courage, that people can change, and that beauty truly is more than skin deep. In an age where appearance is often glorified, Belle reminds us to look beyond the surface. And as we face a world that can sometimes feel harsh and unforgiving, especially today, her story offers hope that kindness and love can transform even the darkest of circumstances. So whether you first met Belle through a dusty old book, a Disney film, or a modern retelling, her journey continues to inspire us to see the best in other people and in ourselves. So that's it for today's episode of Ladies of Lore. I really hope that you've enjoyed exploring another Disney legend. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, maybe share it with your friends, and leave me a review. It really, really helps. And also definitely go and check out RPG Major. Keep your eyes peeled, keep your ears peeled, because I've got so much amazing stuff lined up for you very, very soon. And I'll be back next week to unravel another thread in the rich tapestry of mythology and folklore.